My name is Zach Sargent. I work in the cloud management product at ServiceNow as the technical marketing engineer. And today I'm going to go over some of the features of Kingston that we just released a couple months ago. So today I'm going to talk about that in the framework of what we call Get to Cloud Faster and our adoption model for cloud. So we have this capability adoption across the ITOM portfolio. ITOM is IT Operations Management, and Cloud Management is part of that product suite. So we also provide some of the things that you'll see in the ITOM portfolio, such as visibility. We do our own discovery, including real-time discovery of some of the cloud assets. Health of services, we provide alerts and process alerts from configuration changes and policies and quotas, and then optimization, which cloud management contributes to via self-service. We also see there's an adoption roadmap for most customers. Visibility is king. Most customers that are having difficulty in their operations are having difficulty with visibility. So if you are not doing that right and you don't know what's out there, then the rest of this is really hard to get to. So we recommend starting there. Start with discovery. Figure out, from a cloud perspective, what's your bill look like? What's your infrastructure look like? What are you putting things where? Health also comes back to cloud management a little bit less so than visibility, but we also process some config alerts when people make changes. We can see those things happen. We also have some quotas and other metrics that can give you a good picture of what's going on in your environment. And then optimization. And again, our primary play for optimization and cloud management is through the self-service portal. We also have a cloud management portal where you're able to take day 2 operations, do things like deprovision things on your own without calling an administrator. So this is kind of the lay of the land for us in ITOM, and we're gonna go through the demonstration in that fashion. So we're going to start here with this Cloud Admin Portal. This is a new feature in Kingston. If you're familiar with cloud management in Jakarta, it didn't have anything that looked like this. We had everything in the standard UI, but we gathered that all together and bubbled that up here. So along with the visibility pillar, there's a lot of widgets here that you can really use based on whatever your role is in cloud management. And not by coincidence, we're going to start with billing. So the number one visibility problem that our customers tend to have is what exactly is running out there. So this is a report where I can aggregate all of this information together. I can look at every user on every cloud, every account, and pull this all into one dashboard and say, okay, well, what's out there? If I dive into this, if I want to see what I'm spending on tools, I can see that this is in Azure and AWS. These are normalized billable hours. So all of that gets apples to apples comparison in these charts. I can go back and list, time series. I can say, well, what was last month? And so you can see that piece of it. I can search by service category. Obviously, compute is usually the big one, and so on. I can also do some searching on various tags. So I can search by usernames, for instance. And this user, a lot of our things in our demo environments get provisioned under system administrator. So I can see that here. These spikes are also coincidental with other types of things. The sanity checking that I can do with this graph is pretty powerful. If I go up here and say, okay, well, I can see from the usage, I have these various spikes, what do they mean? So this one, for example, this one says May of last year. This was our knowledge show. So there were some floor demos and some other demonstrations that we did for customers that spiked our usage here. Similarly here, we had some training classes for our sales organization. The demo environment got a lot of use here in early January, and we have an event going on right now, as you can see. This somewhat smaller spike was reInvent. I was at a booth at AWS reInvent this year, or last November. So that's what you can see here. So very quickly, I can kind of sanity check these things, and I can dive into a wide variety of these costs and figures. For example, I can look at tags that we put onto cloud resources as they come back through the billing information. So if I wanted to dive in by application and I wanted to look at something like retail portal, I can see that we've spent $1,404 on that. So additionally, we also have this report for top spends. You can see here that retail portal shows up under application and top spends. Again, $1,404.26. So the top spends can also be sliced and diced a little bit. I can see here on this user track that I am actually a big user of our cloud demo environment. Go figure. That's probably not surprising to anybody. But I can slice and dice this as well. I can go by what was last month. So Tim is obviously still outspending me. I've got a little bit of catching up to do. And a bunch of slackers just using the system administrator tag are still ahead. But I can change, that can be sliced and diced in a wide variety of ways. And these portals, this data can also be customized. If you want this portal to say something a little bit different or show metrics that are not out of the box, you can use our performance analytics tool to do that. The next thing you show is basically our tag management. So, we have a tag dashboard here, and also in here the ability to add new tags. So, for example, ServiceNow has a project management product as well, and I can actually add in here from a different scope. I can add in here a tag that links to the project code, but I can link any table inside of ServiceNow. So if I wanted some asset tag number or an asset code, I can link that to the appropriate table here. So here you can see those different kinds of tables inside of ServiceNow. Any of them are going to be available as a tag that we can add to things. And then if we go out into that particular cloud, if I provision something later and it has a project code tied to it, out in Amazon and out in Azure, we'll actually be able to see those tags. Ultimately, we want all this logic to drive back into CMDB. So people want to use ServiceNow as a source of truth, that sort of single source of everything. And here we can configure alert configurations for those services. So in Azure, you actually have to set up, they used to call it Azure Alert, but there's a service that activates inside of Azure that we actually put out there in a resource group, and then it will actually feed back all of the things from that subscription into our product. In VMware, we have a collector. There's a collector that you can see that's running here. I have a mid server that's hanging around in a VMware environment, and that mid server is collecting data real time from vCenter. In AWS, the approach is a little bit different. We're actually using AWS config with the SNS message delivery, so that notification service will actually push things into ServiceNow. I can go back and look at some of these things in the platform even. So here we can actually look through, where we're getting these things, and I can sort by source. We've obviously received a lot of them. I've gotten a lot of these different things over time, VMware and Azure somewhere in the middle there. So each of these comes into ServiceNow as an event to process in this queue, and then we process them out of the cloud event queue into the CMDB. The health focus for cloud management encompasses two parts. First is a set of metrics and information that describe what the environment looks like, so things like the CMDB. This guides us on a day-to-day basis, and it's critical when failures occur that we understand those relationships. The second part is to mitigate failure or avert failure by making our operations run smoothly. So this is done by standardizing deployments or setting up policies that avoid dead ends that lead to user frustration and self-service. So if I go back to the admin portal here, I can see in my cloud account. So cloud account is a construct that takes different shards of cloud. So I have part AWS, part Azure, and part VMware here. And there's a tab here called capacity limits, and these capacity limits prevent overrun. So if I set this capacity limit for this cloud account, I now can't go over that in terms of provisioning these types of resources. So that's a speed limit, a speed bump sometimes, where you can see, okay, I'm not over provisioning this environment. It's more important usually in a vSphere environment for your on-prem to say, okay, my capacity is a set amount, and I don't want to go over that set amount. A second place that we can set up speed bumps is here under quotas. So quota definition and quota configuration are basically where you define what resources go to what groups. So the group names that you can see here, I'm going to sort by group name real quick, and then you can see how the quotas line out for each of those groups. Now quotas are hard and soft, so there is a way that you can get around them using templates. There are policies that you could set up that would even prevent someone who's over quota from provisioning a new template. If you're over quota in CPU, maybe you can't even get anything else, even if it's extending disk, even if you have disk left available in your quota. So there's some complexity and some nuance that you could bring to that based on the policies for your organization. It's still under that menu. So a new thing that we brought to Kingston was actually the ability, kind of similar to quotas, but we called them budgets. The budget alerts are based on dollar amounts. So every night when we scan your billing data, we actually also scan for budget notifications. So budget notifications can be sent out in a configurable threshold. So for instance, let's see, alert types. So at 80%, we're sending out these alerts. You know, this one, we're sending one at 50%. And then these are the types here where all the way down to team developer, code reviewers. It looks like they have an alert at 50, a warning at 90, and some severe warnings at 100%. So that way they know, probably their boss knows, and maybe even their boss's boss knows by the time they get to 100% of their budget. And the budget is flexible. It can be set up, you know, monthly, weekly, daily, even. So these budgets are very configurable as well. So just like capacity limits and quotas are there to prevent overrunning, this is there to prevent overspending. And just so that it's not all on the cloud administrator, in the user portal, we're actually able to see these things as well. So this user doesn't have any budget because his environment is pretty clean. But normally you'd be able to see a little bit of budget spend here along with the quotas and current monthly spend. My view as the administrator is currently everything in the system here, so it's a little bit different. But an average user is going to be able to see their own things reflected here. I kind of liken it to the speed limit, your speed is indicator when you go into a construction zone. We're actually feeding back that information to the end users in hopes to train their behavior. Another big piece of being able to maintain a healthy environment for your cloud is standardization. So we have resource profiles. Resource profiles are standardized things that you can choose. Each cloud provider does things a little bit differently. So if we click into one of these, you can see that we have each one configured for the 3 different clouds that I have in my cloud account. So US West here is AWS. So this one is going to be M1 Medium, which is an AWS size. Here I have a custom size defined for VMware in my VMware environment, which is a 1 CPU by 4 gigs of RAM. And Azure has their standard DS1 v2, also tied to West US 2, which is the Azure data center in Oregon. So all of these are going to give me a similar result when I go and select which profile I'm looking for. We do the same thing with operating systems as well. So I can come in here to OS profiles, and I also get a list of, you know, these are the operating systems we support. If I go into Ubuntu Server, for example, I have Ubuntu Server configured for each of these clouds as well. Each one of these guys is going to have a a mapping to, for AWS, it's going to be in AMI, as you can see here. For Azure, it's going to be, Ubuntu server, the latest offering. And then I actually have a template image in my vCenter that also provisions the same version, the 16.04 version of Ubuntu. Arguably the most powerful part of the entire cloud management product is our policy engine. Here you can see a variety of policies that we have in this instance. The green ones are active, the other ones are things that I've worked on or are no longer needed. So for example, in a demonstration environment, one of the things that's really critical to me is to set a short lease time. So I want to, make sure that resources don't get spun up and they're left there for weeks before somebody comes back and takes care of them. Instead, we usually just want to leave them out there for a couple hours. So here you can see I have a set short lease policy. The policy trigger, there are multiple policy triggers, but this one I have set for on catalog item launch. So you can also set them for things like on blueprint launch, which says I'm getting ready to go build this thing, and before I build it, I need to change some variables around and change some of the data that the user gave back to me. You can use that to do things like drive provisioning off of business questions. So in catalog item launch, this actually means that from the time the user clicks on the catalog item in the portal, I'm going to go set up a couple of variables like this lease time or naming convention or anything else you might want to pre-fill for the end user. And I'm going to put that into the form before they get presented with what it is on the screen. So in the policy action scripts, I have a set lease short script. This looks way more complicated than it is. A lot of this is auto-generated. So if you're used to some of the script fields in ServiceNow, where a lot of this gets generated for you, all but this piece of it actually shows up for me. And this is basically the thing that I say, hey, by the way, I'm going to set the lease for 3 hours. So this is where that gets done. So even with all these policies and standard profiles and all of this in place, sometimes users will still pick bad things, and sometimes the cloud just misbehaves a little bit. So one of my favorite problems is overrunning the AWS endpoint because we've sent too many API calls to it in the past hour or even the past minute. So when those kinds of issues happen and you get something that doesn't quite work, we have this root cause dashboard. And so this is a great thing because we've gathered together a lot of the problems in one place that you might run into, or at least all the information for those things. So I can look at a recent request item, for example. Let's see if I can scroll to the bottom here. So for instance, this one, you can say, hey, look, there's a policy engine here. A policy response payload was processed. This is the naming convention or the lease, for example. And this information gets put into what we call the cloud orchestration trail. So you can also access this here in the menu under trails. But one of the most useful things is also this submit form. So submit form says I, the end user, actually submitted these as my provisioning form. So let's see. So if I do this, and I pop this guy out there, I get a nice pretty version of what the user had entered. So here I can see that I've been provisioning this stack and Showcase Cloud, and these are the things that come with that. So this is useful because now I can actually do some troubleshooting to see, oh, did they fill in all the forms? If I have a cost center as a mandatory field, or I'm looking for something that might have gone wrong with their naming convention, it wasn't unique enough or something to that effect, I'll be able to see those types of things in here. And while we're here, I may as well show you the CAPI trail as well. So there's a component of cloud management that we call the Cloud API trail. And this basically is a list of all the things that we ask mid-servers to do during the day. So here you can see that we've had some conversations with with our mid, some of them that came as errors. I can dive into these and look at various bits of the error. So all of this kind of stuff is embedded in here. So apparently I tried to recreate an S3 bucket earlier today that I already owned. So that gives you some idea of the types of error handling. So when health fails, you can go in and try to resolve some of those issues. The last thing that I need to show you is really how to create a catalog item in the first place. How do we go from something, a concept on the web, to something that we can consume? And so here is, for instance, AWS's documentation page. And on this page, they actually have a lot of different services with a variety of templates available. So one of the ones that I like to do is DynamoDB, just because it's really quick to provision. And you've already seen that I'm charged a lot for databases in a given month. So here I can just snag this template. And let's go back to the admin portal and punch this in. It's under templates. So if I create a new one, we're going to call this Dynamo 03B, and this is a new CloudFormation template. I'm going to paste that script body in here and we'll save it. I can just hit submit, but then it drops me back to a different screen. So this is a magic shortcut item, this create blueprint and catalog item. And in the background, it's actually moving a lot of machinery for us to turn this into a working catalog item. Okay, so now I'm going to go up to blueprints here, and you can see that I actually have a blueprint of the same name here. So I can come in here and I can actually edit a few things. I can change the user experience a little bit. One of the things I like to do is add an icon. So I have a lot of icons to choose from, and I've done this before, so I have one for Dynamo. And there it is. And I can update this. Let's go back into the catalog item. I can also change the user experience a little bit. So this form field here, this form tab, references what we call dynamic forms. So when I pull in something with the CFT, one of the default fields is this additional API parameters. And this is used to define things like IAM role, and I don't need it for this template. So I already know, oh, not read only, but not visible. And so I can update that. I don't have to have it checked out to update, but I do have to have it checked out to publish. So we'll get back to that in a second. So lease end date. I already know that I have a lease policy. You guys already saw that. So I'm going to set this to read only. And then also I have a stack naming policy. Whoops. I have a stack naming policy. I'm going to make that read only. Okay, so I've touched three fields. I've hidden the API parameters, and I've made lease and stack name read only. I'm going to publish this. Okay, and now I'm going to go back to my user portal and see what happens when I hit launch a stack. Okay, all right, there's Dynamo. This is my offering for the catalog. Now when I click on this, as I said before, it's actually loading some of those policies ahead of time. So you can see here that my demo user is Alfonso Griglin, and I have a naming convention that basically is initials plus current time and date. And then I also have a lease end date already set here. So this front page, I've already selected everything. Everything is chosen automatically, either through pools or policies or configuration. I don't have to show the user any of these things. If I already know what all these things are, I can hide the whole thing. For provisioning a DynamoDB, all I need is a hash key. So I'm going to set this one, let's call it email. And these are pre-filled from the template. So if I go back and look at the template, And the element types in this parameter key, I've already read in all of these types and their current values and defaults, mins, and maxes. So these things are already part of the description for the catalog item. And when I hit submit, there are other policies that can run at this submit time. So on blueprint item provision, there's also on blueprint item approval. I can send this off to do an approval policy. You can see here that this one is auto approved. I don't have an approval policy in place in my demo environment, and it's just going to go straight into deploying the stack. So there is a little bit of feedback here that it gives the user. I happen to know that this template deploys pretty quickly. That was one of the reasons I chose it for this particular demonstration. So you can see that status here. Also, we can have policies that send out emails or other types of notification if need be. So I'm going to wait for just a minute while it goes ahead and sets up this Dynamo database. All right, now that we have our provisioned DynamoDB, what else can we do with it? Well, the short answer is I can go look in stacks. I'm still currently configured as the administrator. Oh, it just happens to be first. That's pretty convenient. So as I look in here, I'm going to be able to take stack operations on this thing. So this is my DynamoDB table. If I was to look out in Amazon, it would have all of our tags on it, all the things that we wanted to use for it. And then out here, I have some day 2 operations that I can take on it. If it's appropriate, start and stop operations will work. Not every service has a stop and start. Deprovision is something that I'm going to do here in a second, but the other 2 things on here, modify schedule and modify lease, are actually internal to ServiceNow. So modify schedule is a business hours scheduling. We can actually set a schedule profile on any of these resources so that it only runs from 8 to 5, for example. And modify lease is to change the end date of when this is set to expire. I'm not going to do any of those. I'm going to jump the gun on deprovisioning it, just to kind of show that I have all of that in play. Now, if this was a production environment, I can change the policy. So I can say, it's fine in dev if you spin things up and spin things down, but it's not okay in our production environment. We want that to go through change review. You can actually open a formal change review task and wait for cab approval before it'll go through and actually finish the deprovisioning action. All right, well, while that's going on, there's one last thing to show you in this catalog, and that's our agnostic Ubuntu. So remember we had those profiles set up that we had looked at for Ubuntu Server. Well, this is kind of the place that we would put those to use. So this is a blueprint that allows me to show you, yes, we can provision to any cloud. So here, this form actually will change what it presents to the end user based on which data center I choose. So it starts out with AWS, but let's say that I pick Azure. So if I pick Azure, it's going to ask me, hey, do you want that in a new resource group? Now, that's not a construct that is useful for AWS, but this form, as it updates in the background, is going to actually come back with that. So it says, create resource group no. We're going to lock this down. So these are read-only fields. So I already know where I want it to go if we go to Azure. So any of these grayed out fields are also fields that can just be hidden outright. I don't have to have them on the form. They don't have to be part of the user experience. They can be filled out with policy. In fact, here they are filled out with policy. If I go to the provision tab, I have things that are relevant to Azure from a provisioning perspective. So which network? I have an ephemeral home network. And then which subnet ID? I have an ephemeral subnet. So these are things that are part of the demo environment where I'll stand something up and I don't want it to last very long. And then also part of Azure, do I want to use managed disk, yes or no? But if I come back here and I select something else, let's say vSphere, because we haven't seen that yet. So if I select vSphere, then I'm going to get choices that are relevant for VMware. And this could go to my VMware environment instead. So here, as you can see, I have a different set of choices. I have a folder, and I've locked this down already because I know that I want everything in my vCenter to go into that folder. In my virtual server network, I'm choosing one network here out of a slew of VMware available networks. And this is my compute profile. And I can hit go here, and it'll also give me an Ubuntu server. So that concludes my demo. Hopefully you've come away with a broader understanding of ServiceNow's cloud management and our Kingston release. Have a good one.